Hi, Anne here, and this is More Than a Love Interest, the show where we talk about the arcs of female characters in film. Today, we are going to talk about Star Wars. Specifically, we are going to talk about Episode 1, The Phantom Menace from 1999, and the main character,
Queen Amidala herself.
Now if you're thinking, what? The main character? She's barely in this. Well, let's talk about that. Pop culture, and I mean beyond Star Wars fans, tend to remember Darth Maul and the pod racing, and not much else about this movie. Queen Amidala herself is a fixture in pop culture, but mainly due to her costuming, which is as much a reflection of merchandising as of the film itself. But how important is her character in this movie? To explore that, we are going to discuss how essential her actions are, and how they build the groundwork for the rest of the prequel trilogy, and the whole saga, to some extent. Now, a lot happens in this movie, but here are the things that directly affect Padme. Darth Sidious gets the Trade Federation to blockade Naboo, Padme's home planet. Padme decides to surrender rather than go to war. The Viceroy captures her. She refuses to cooperate. The Jedi rescue her and they have to stop on Tatooine. Padme insists on joining Qui-Gon and going to the spaceport Mos Espa. Padme meets Anakin and makes an impression. Anakin helps them plot a way to get off the planet by having him win the pod race. On Coruscant, Palpatine counsels Padme to lower her expectations of help. Padme goes before the Senate and puts in a vote of no confidence. Then she gives up on the Senate and returns to Naboo to handle the situation herself. She allies with the Gungans as a part of a plan to storm the palace. She is taken captive by the Viceroy during the attack. Her decoy tricks the Viceroy so she can turn the tables and capture him. Padme celebrates peace with the Gungans and a successful ousting of the Trade Federation. As you probably noticed, plot elements happen to Padme, and she has the agency to respond to them at the beginning of the film and to proactively drive the plot at the end. Her overall contributions to the story of this film include patching things up with the Gungans and the Naboo, removing Chancellor Valorum from power, as well as impacting the saga by being the reason Anakin Skywalker left Tatooine, and facilitating Palpatine becoming High Chancellor of the Galactic Senate. Palpatine may have been orchestrating some of these events, but this movie sets up the idea of Palpatine and Padme being significant influences on the politics in the galaxy, which will be further cemented by their sway over Anakin in future films. So I think we have established that Padme has clear agency over the events of the film, which is often not the case for female characters. She is able to affect the plot based on her own wants and needs, and the events that unfurl are at least as much due to her motivations as anyone else's. Having agency is very important, but for a character to be more than a love interest, she needs to also have an internal journey, so let's get into that. To discuss Padme's character arc, we are going to use Maureen Murdock's Heroine's Journey. Murdock worked with Joseph Campbell, who, if you're a Star Wars fan, you've probably heard of. He wrote The Hero with 1,000 Faces, which George Lucas took as inspiration for the original trilogy and Luke's hero's journey. Murdock developed the heroine's journey in response to Campbell's assertion that women don't have a journey in epic tales. The point of both the heroine's and hero's journeys is to come of age, as a result of a symbolic descent and return to become a more complete person. For the heroine's journey, it begins with rejecting the feminine and ends with accepting and integrating the feminine with the masculine. Side note, we're going to be referring to feminine and masculine in the theoretical sense of film language encoding, not in the context of an individual. Alright, there's a link below if you're interested, but let's get back to Padme. I chose her for the first episode of this show because she goes through arguably all of the steps of the journey in this film, which is pretty rare. The first step is the separation from the feminine. It is often represented by the separation of a woman from her mother as a part of growing up, but it can also be a separation from a societal role that is classically feminine. As Queen of Naboo, Padme fits this latter definition. Since this will be important to evaluate how her arc ends, we must first establish what makes her fully in the feminine to begin with. As queen, she is in a feminine role and plays the mother figure to her people. She is dressed in elaborate costumes with heavy makeup and complicated hair arrangements. All of this represents a very feminine figure. In her very first scene speaking to the Viceroy, she is confident that the Chancellor has sent ambassadors to negotiate on her behalf, assured of the Senate's power. When she is then speaking to her counselors, she listens to their advice before making a decision. She chooses to surrender rather than go to war, which is a more feminine response to attack. Not to imply that femininity is weakness, the narrative does not suggest that this was an unwise decision, nor does anyone argue with her choice to surrender.
I will not condone a course of action that will lead us to war.
Padme then separates from her very feminine role as queen to become one of her handmaidens as she is captured by the Viceroy. The queen shown here is actually her decoy, Sabe, while Padme is disguised behind her. Being a handmaiden is, of course, also a feminine role, but Padme has left her status as queen for strategic purposes. It is likely that she has, or is, formulating a plan to escape, while her decoy takes her place in the camp. The next step on the journey is to identify with the masculine and gather allies. As a politician, Padme gathers many allies in this film, but we will focus on the ally that she has for the majority of the movie, Qui-Gon Jinn, who becomes something of a mentor figure for her. He and Obi-Wan rescue her and her retinue, and Qui-Gon immediately takes charge of the situation. He insists that she must flee the planet, and she initially resists. Her own counselors, the governor and her captain of the guard, argue with Qui-Gon's reasoning, but she is persuaded to leave in order to plead her case to the Senate, communicating through her decoy and leaving behind her governor, further solidifying her rejection of the feminine, her queenly allies, in favor of a new masculine ally. Her mission is to gather more allies in the form of the Senate, a predominantly masculine body. Leaving Naboo solidifies her rejection of the feminine in favor of masculine allies. The third step for the heroine is the Road of Trials, meeting ogres and dragons. For Padme, the Road of Trials includes all of the things that occur on her journey to Coruscant. Fleeing Naboo and being attacked by the Trade Federation, having nowhere to go except Tatooine, the obstacles they encounter there, and her awareness of her people's suffering as she hurries to Coruscant. Notably, the longer they are on Tatooine, the more she starts to doubt her masculine ally.
You sure about this? Trusting our fate to a boy we hardly know? The Queen will not approve.
No longer certain he is serving her needs as queen.
Well, I don't approve.
She questions his plan and resists his reassurances.
You Jedi are far too reckless. The Queen is not.
The Queen trusts my judgment, young handmaiden. You should too.
Though she does not attempt to change their course of action. As for the dragons and ogres, the Viceroy, as the proxy of Darth Sidious, has the role of dragon in this story. During Padme's Road of Trials, we regularly cut to what the Viceroy is doing to build attention and make it clear why it's so important for Padme to get to the Senate to stop him. Also, his presence is one of the reasons why Padme is the main character of this film. No one else in the movie has similar motivation in the climax. Obi-Wan has never met Darth Maul before. Anakin has a sort of nemesis in Sebulba, but that's over with shortly after we meet either of them. In the climax of the film, he happens to destroy the droid control ship, which helps Padme, not himself. Jar Jar and the Gungans fight the droid army, so they have more personal stakes and are more like Padme, but have no direct antagonist to face off against. The film is resolved by Padme being able to defeat the Viceroy, and that is where the emotional catharsis comes from.
Now, Viceroy, we will discuss a new treaty.
The fourth step of the journey is finding the illusion of success. This is where the heroine's journey diverges from the traditional hero's journey, which would end here. Unlike the hero, the heroine finds that this moment of success is not sustainable, and her journey must continue in order to address her inner conflict. She will become disillusioned by this point in the story, leading to the heroine's darkest moments in the next section. Padme experiences this success and the perceived end of her Road of Trials when Anakin wins the pod race, and they are finally going to leave Tatooine. She is once again going to be on her journey to save her people, and her masculine ally, Qui-Gon, has been proven trustworthy despite her doubts. It is also only an illusion of success because we know the appeal to the Senate isn't going to work out the way she wants. The darkest points for the heroine are steps 5 and 6, where she feels spiritually dead and descends to her lowest emotional state in the journey. The heroine now perceives that the earlier success is not sustainable, that her rejection of the feminine and dependence on masculine allies is not going to solve her problems. This is her crisis of faith, where she must reconsider her choices that led her to this place. These two steps happen for Padme at about the same time, so I'm going to talk about them together. Both are on Coruscant, as she is counseled by Senator Palpatine and speaks to the Senate. First, Palpatine assures her that her greatest supporter, the Chancellor, will be unable to help them due to being easily swayed by the bureaucrats, who are allied with the Trade Federation. He basically explains that her trip here was worthless unless she votes for no confidence in the current Chancellor.
You could call for a vote of no confidence in Chancellor Valorum.
He has been our strongest supporter.
The descent part of the journey tends to be more mythic in these stories. Think Rey in the Cave on Ahch-To in The Last Jedi, or Luke in the Cave on Dagobah in The Empire Strikes Back. So you could argue that Padme does not go through this step. One issue with Padme in this movie is that she's Queen Amidala, but the audience doesn't necessarily know that until the end of the film, so it is not immediately clear that we are learning more about the same character. We see Padme's inner life far more than the Queen's, and the Queen remains distant until this scene, when we can see clearly her disillusionment, disappointment, and pain at having to put in a vote of no confidence. Before this, she is difficult to empathize with, which makes it challenging for this step to be fleshed out in the way that it is with Luke and Rey. Since she is not a Force user, such a scene for Padme would be difficult to accept. As a politician, her descent is in a darkly lit Senate hearing surrounded by blackness, while the devil sits on her shoulder. At the hearing, Palpatine further insists that the Chancellor can do nothing to help their cause. She may not have entirely trusted him on this before, but she sees it happen herself. As a result, she loses her faith in the Senate and votes no confidence in the Chancellor before giving up on the process entirely. The Senate cannot help her, and this journey was for nothing.
I move for a vote of no confidence in Chancellor Valorum's leadership.
Things start to look up for the heroine in the next step, where she urgently yearns to reconnect to her feminine side. She has realized that her rejection of part of herself is unsustainable and wants to get it back as soon as possible. I think Padme fits the urgently category here better than any other characters we are going to discuss. After her descent, she immediately decides to leave and return to Naboo, to her feminine role there as queen, and this time ignores the masculine advisors who counsel her to stay.
I will sign no treaty, Senator. My fate will be no different than that of our people. Captain.
Your Highness.
Ready my ship.
This is a major growth moment for Padme. She rejects counsel for the first time since we met her, and is intent on solving this her own way, no matter the danger. She has given up the masculine allies she sought in favor of relying on her own abilities. For the 8th step of the journey, the heroine heals the mother-daughter split. The heroine reclaims some values or skills she had at the beginning of the story, but now with a new perspective. She has learned the value of her feminine aspects as a result of being away from them. She must accept the feminine again after rejecting it initially. Padme was not split from her mother, but from her people and role as queen. For this step, she returns to Naboo, reclaiming her role as the ruler of the planet and leader of the people. Importantly, she has grown as a person and leads the decision-making meetings with her advisors at this point in the story. While she mainly accepted the advice of others in the beginning, she is now the one with the plans of what to do to end the war. This includes allying with the Gungans, capturing the Viceroy, and attacking the droid control ship. 2 thoughts about this growth. First, her plan is to use the Gungans as a decoy while she leads a small party to take the Viceroy captive. We have seen her use a decoy throughout the movie, and now she uses this idea on a larger scale. This is a wonderful representation of a woman being in an action movie without being an action girl. She does show that she can handle herself in a firefight, but her main contribution to the climax of the film is her strategizing, not her fighting capabilities. She is shown as a strong female character by actually using her personal strengths, not just by having her punch or shoot people. Second, and put on your tinfoil hat for this one because I don't know how much evidence there is of this fan theory, but Naboo elects young queens, teenagers, and dresses them like porcelain dolls. They state that young women are chosen as they are unlikely to be corrupted, but it's entirely possible that the intent is to have a figurehead. Padme certainly seems like one at the beginning, following the advice of her counselors, before growing as a person and reclaiming her sovereignty. She may be an important figure in Naboo history, not just for saving her people here, but also because she may cause a restructuring of government to give the queens real power. We're going to go back a scene to talk about Step 9, where the heroine must heal the wounded masculine. This is generally symbolic, as accepting both sides of herself is the final step of the journey, but for Padme it actually is a literal situation she's in. The Gungans live on Naboo, but there is a great deal of animosity between them and Padme's people, as insinuated by Boz Nass when she meets him. Now the Queen is obviously the feminine here, and the Gungans could arguably be considered the masculine. I don't see any ladies in the crowd, is all I'm saying. Her decision to beg for their help and form a peace with them heals a divide on her planet in order to save it. This is excellent symbolism for healing the wounded masculine within, as an important step toward wholeness. It is also symbolically relevant that Padme reveals herself as the Queen to Boz Nass and to the audience when she did not do so with the Jedi or Anakin. This indicates her continuing on her journey to reconcile the two sides of her nature and to no longer reject or hide any part of herself. She goes to considerable lengths to reconcile with the Gungans, healing the wounded masculine externally, which represents healing her internal conflict as well. Finally, the heroine integrates the masculine and feminine aspects of herself to become a complete person. She is no longer rejecting one side in favor of the other. Padme reconciles with Palpatine, congratulating each other as equals rather than seeking his counsel or rejecting it. She depends on herself completely now. She is equally calm as she has a final meeting with the Viceroy, her antagonist, demonstrating her newfound strength in herself as a different person from their initial interaction. The final scene of the movie shows Padme as Queen Amidala, but dressed more simply than we have seen her before. This is more Padme than the heavily costumed queen from the beginning. She has matured as a person from being led by advisors to clearly in charge of her people. She has saved her planet from the Trade Federation and become allies with the Gungans, healing that divide. She has completed her journey and become a more whole person and a better queen than when we first met her. Before we get to my final thoughts on Padme, we need to talk about one major thing for films. An issue with female characters being represented in this visual medium is that her character arc can be undermined by how she is framed or what she is wearing. Even the most complex female character can be diminished if she is presented like a sexy lamp, something we will certainly talk about in later episodes of this show. There is a link in the description to a detailed analysis of each costume, but I'll try to be more succinct here. First, let's talk about the Queen's costumes. These are just fantastic and a pleasure to watch, to be honest. All of them are heavily detailed, with the level of opulence one would expect from a queen. As the Queen sometimes uses a decoy, the costumes go to considerable lengths to obfuscate the personhood of the Queen. Her makeup, headdresses, and the many layers of her gowns lend to the regal impression of office. And it is also impossible to tell that she is a teenage girl. These queenly outfits are as much a costume in-universe as out of it, and they change to suit the needs of the queen in the story. Her most regal and opulent is the red dress she wears to address the Senate, demanding that she be listened to, that the importance of her plight cannot be ignored. Her dress during the ending celebration is comparatively simple, with lighter makeup and no headdress. She has revealed her true identity to the Gungans and to the audience, so a less stately costume makes sense. Now, on to the handmaiden costumes. Let me start by saying that, if I say the phrase handmaiden, what do you think of? I can almost guarantee that nothing Padme the handmaiden wears fits that bill. She has long sleeves, flowing fabrics, nothing form-fitting or revealing, and one even has pants! Not even harem pants, just regular pants. Her hair is kept out of her face instead of being luxurious and flowing. She is comfortably able to move about as a faceless handmaiden while her decoy dresses as the queen, and, metatextually, the handmaidens are perceived as objects by both in-universe characters and by the audience. We do not pick up on their individuality, and Padme has weaponized that predisposition in order to hide in plain sight. It is a great example of a female character being clever in a female-specific way. Whether Padme is dressed as a handmaiden or as the queen, her costumes maintain a consistent theme. But the important thing to note is that, though varying in practicality, all of her costumes make sense in universe. They serve her role as queen and as handmaiden, with layers to both that obscure the decoy versus Padme distinction. There is clearly a good reason behind the costume choices, and none are tight-fitting or show much skin, which is good, because she is a child. They may not look like the most comfortable costumes in the world, but they certainly do not devalue her character in any way. It is one of the best examples I have seen of a female character being presented as feminine without being objectified or sexualized. Alright, here are my final thoughts about Padme. First, she is definitely the main character of the story. No one else has an arc. We are not privy to the inner lives of our other main characters. They are all story fuel for her journey. Anakin Skywalker may be the main focus of the prequel trilogy, as is their relationship, but his role in this movie is to help Padme on her road of trials. He is no major antagonist to face off against after the pod race, and is mostly incidental to the plot. The same is true of Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, though the latter helps Padme develop as a person and guides her along her arc. He is something of a mentor figure for her as the protagonist. Now, one of the reasons that this may not feel like it's Padme's story is the subterfuge that the Queen and Padme are not being established as the same person for the audience. As I said before, this does make it harder to empathize with her throughout, even if you know she's the Queen. I think it could have been handled a little differently to help with that, but the overall idea provides a nice method for Padme to be clever in a feminine way and also passes the Bechdel test.
Either choice presents great danger to us all.
We are brave, Your Highness.
So again, she does get to be an action girl at the end of the film, but the stakes are hers, while Anakin, her love interest, is just along for the ride. That's a reversal of how it usually happens, so that's great. Final evaluation. Is she more than a love interest? Yes. Now, going back to the original pitch for the prequel trilogy, the only things that had to happen was for Anakin to fall to the dark side and have children at some point. So Padme's role could easily have been a breed and die trope, and she could have been introduced in the final part of the trilogy instead of getting her own movie. It would have been easier for Lucas to start the trilogy with Anakin as the main focus, and he made a bold move starting with Padme. Padme is the main character of this film. She goes through every step of the journey and is the only character who really goes on any kind of arc. I've always wondered why there is a time skip between episode 1 and episode 2, and why the story doesn't just start from Anakin's point of view. And I think we have sufficient evidence here to say the reason is Padme. She gets her own movie at the start of the trilogy to set things into place, and put her as the character foil to Palpatine, setting up how the future of the galaxy is determined by their respective influences on Anakin. So she may serve the purpose of love interest, but this is her movie to establish her moral integrity and political acumen, as she will be the representation of the light side, at least in the realm of politics, in the upcoming battle for Anakin's soul, and for the galaxy itself.
I'm glad to have met you, Anakin.
I was glad to meet you too.
Alright, I find that women tend to have more complete character arcs in books than in mainstream movies, so I like to leave you with a book recommendation. I would love to hear yours in the comments below. If you enjoy Padme's character in this movie, I would recommend reading The Queen of Atolia by Megan Whalen Turner. There are political machinations and fantastic twists. Please check it out. Anyway, thank you all for listening to me talk about The Phantom Menace. It may not be your favorite Star Wars, but seeing a woman in a major franchise with agency and a logical progression of her arc is always a pleasure. We will talk more about her future installments later on, but next time on More Than a Love Interest, we are going to talk about another heroine from the turn of the century, Elizabeth Swann in Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl. Please like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, all the things so you don't miss it. See you then.
Fine. Well, I suppose if it is worthless, then there's no point in me keeping it.